Greetings and hello, this is Matt Kaufman, the host of Breaking Bread. I'm glad to bring you today's podcast. I regret that some of the audio quality is not as excellent as I would like, so I apologize for that. Thank you for understanding.
I have heard one lady say that in growing up, her mother told her, if you can't do it right, don't do it at all. And so as a result, she grew up not learning a lot of things because she couldn't do it perfectly.
Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. It is great to have you along. Today's topic is about launching kids, and I've got as guests Roger Gasser and Craig Stickling, both of which have launched kids. So we're happy to have this conversation with you both. Roger, why don't you share what in the world do I even mean by launching kids?
We spend much of our time, much of their upbringing, helping them to find roots, but then the purpose of that is to help them find wings so that they can go on their own. That's what I think. Roots and wings.
I really like that, Roger. Roots and wings. Craig, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would say as some people look at this launching concept, Matt, that they're looking at, can my child be a productive, contributing member to society, right? Are they able to have a job? Are they able to keep relationships? Are they able to grow spiritually? Are they able to just make the transition from people just doing for them to them being able then to do for themselves and also then do for others in that sense?
What would be some of the earmarks then that we would look for in building this readiness or this launching of the individual?
I kind of like three lenses. One looks at just behaviors, okay? So what are they doing? And so for behaviors that, we do what we do because we think what we think, so that's tied into their thinking. So their thought and behavior, that's an earmark of how is their thinking, and then how do they respond to their thinking? So what's their behavior? A next piece, a huge one, is handling emotions. That's a powerful time at that teenage, and the emotions and figuring that out, that speaks very loud. And so how are they able to regulate emotions and manage their emotions? And then that last piece looks at the spiritual lens. What is their depth? What is their understanding of God? What do they understand about that, about the plan of salvation, about God's design for them to live for Him, and their understanding of what that looks for their life? I like those three earmarks as starting spots, as looking at that launching piece.
I really like that. Those make a lot of sense. Rod, what would you add to that?
I like the idea of earmarks. I think there are three things parents need to keep in mind as our children begin to leave the nest. And one of them, a big one, is we're just stewards of our children. We're not the owners. God owns them. And so they're just under our stewardship for a little while. And that means that we should not be able to dictate their beliefs, their thoughts. That's God's prerogative. And then the second thing, God has thought about that child's future a lot longer than we have. I mean, if we understand Psalm 139 correctly, that He, and Jeremiah 29.
Yeah, Jeremiah for sure.
That He's had them in His sights since before creation. And so who are we to try to think that our children should be doing this, such and such at a certain time, because God has that under His control. And then finally, that we're workers together with Him, 2 Corinthians 6:1, because we are working with God on this project. He's in charge of it. Remember, we're just stewards.
So I have to comment on the balance that both of you brothers have provided in this address of this topic. Craig, your address as a parent really made me think, all right, now these are the things I need to be thinking about with my young person and bringing them to this point of launching. Obviously, I do have a role to play here in their behavior, emotions, spiritual, all of these things. And then, Roger, your encouragement helped alleviate a little bit of my responsibility and helping me understand my responsibility in that I am a steward and that God has purposes and those types of things. And I think both of these need to go hand in glove, don't they? And one without the other puts us in a pretty unhealthy spot to launch.
That's correct.
To launch kids. And I would love to kind of move forward with both of these in hand. And now let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing. Craig, I'd like to go back to your emphasis on maybe unprepared youth for adulthood. You work with young adults as in a career. Is this something that you see?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And I don't know, maybe every generation can speak into this or to talk about this, but what a hard time to be a kid. We look at a culture that has minimized their significance, right? And really, we don't expect much out of them. Replace everything with an academic focus, which is important and needed, but we really have stopped expecting things out of them. The lack of accomplishing chores or being a productive member of the household with what they're asked to do. Society doesn't value that or expect that. They're filled with this world of technology that allows them to dismiss and disengage so easily, so quickly. And not just them, obviously we can speak to ourselves as well in that. And so we have this, society doesn't expect much out of them, and then technology and their world allows them to escape. And so it's a hard place for them to be at. And so we really need to encourage them to step up to the plate, not because we want them to, but because God has created them to be who they are and to explore that.
And this makes it important that as parents, we let them fail. I have seen, Brother Craig has also seen this, no doubt, helicopter parents that try to micromanage every aspect of their children's lives and to prevent them from failing. And actually, that should not be our goal, that we prevent our kids from failing. Some of that is an issue of pride for parents. Look at my kid, they have made all the correct decisions and they're doing everything exactly right. Whereas what we want to happen is when the child reaches adulthood, they have some practice in making wrong choices. And so that it should not be the goal of a parent, I don't think, to prevent the child from making any bad mistake. Because when they make a mistake as a young person, the consequence is there, but it's not as severe nor as permanent as a bad choice when they're 30 or 40 years old.
Roger, I completely appreciate that. And I think you've just, spoken to a really difficult tension to maintain. At what level do we protect and do we hedge and we shelter kids, I think is a important conversation to have. But I want to add a scenario, Roger, to what you've just said. And that is not only failure, but here's what I've also found. Do we let our kids get hurt by this world? It's not their mistake. They didn't make it. As a parent, do I step in on that? Or is that part of the exercise as well to say, yep, you're going to have a boss like that. Yep, you're going to have a supervisor like that. Yep, you're going to have a teacher like that. Yep, you're going to. And I find this is an interesting tension also.
That is an interesting tension. And I have heard one lady say that in growing up, her mother told her, if you can't do it right, don't do it at all. And so as a result, she grew up not learning a lot of things because she couldn't do it perfectly like her mother expected at the first time. And so I think that it's necessary to intervene. However, I do believe and it's an African proverb. The African proverb says, it takes a village to raise a child. There is some wisdom to that because the village that is raising the child is going to be other teachers. It's going to be police officers. It's going to be cafeteria workers. It's going to be other employers. And we cannot totally shield the child from their bad behaviors. And the better choice, I think, is to process with the child what just happened. I recall seeing one of our children in a ball pit, and he was besieged with balls and was looking to me as to what he should do since this bully pelted him with balls. And I think that that's a model for us, that we need to explain how to respond, and when somebody is just having fun and when they mean it ill. I think there's a lot of mind reading that goes on.
So in that moment, if I understand that, you watched a moment where your child was being bullied or being threatened or being picked on, and you had a moment, a decision: do I step in? What does stepping in look like in this moment? What is the learning that needs to happen in this moment? And so I am really interested to know how you handled that, Roger. Was part of your lesson to say, this is how we handle situations like this, or this is how we stop situations like this? Because those are two different things.
I think the lesson is how to handle it, because the situation, although different, will be repeated many times in that child's life. And so learning to handle somebody being overbearing is a better lesson than learning how to stop it. I mean, I could intervene and stop the other bully, but that's not gonna help. What if I'm not around the next time? I mean, most likely I won't be. And so our lesson needs to be how to deal with situations like this when Dad's not around.
Yeah, I think it's wise to remember that our kids always will have an opportunity to learn, right? And we want to make sure they learn the right lesson, even from the good models, even from those good examples, those good friends, those good parents, the good teachers, the good, early employer, the good friends that they have, but also that they're able to learn from the ones who aren't that way, who aren't so good, who maybe don't quite have the same thoughts or ideas or beliefs or actions or behaviors that they do, and that they're able to learn from those. I appreciate, Roger, as you shared your story, what I captured out of that was that when something happened to your child, where did your child look? That's what I like. Your child looked to you. And I think that is a huge part of our growth with our kids. And we don't wait until they're 17 to start that process. That starts at, right when they come home from the hospital. And so to be reminded that a launching sequence of a 17, 18-year-old really begins when they come home, when we have them as little babies. And so to be reminded of the beauty of that.
Yeah. But what I really like is our kids are looking to us, per the illustration that Roger gave. Are they going to look to us to solve, or are they going to look to us to help them navigate and learn from the situation? And I think for me in this conversation, that's been a healthy switch in my mind. When my kids look to me, I need to help them learn from the situation. That's what they most need, as opposed to dissolving an unwanted or unliked circumstance. Is that fair to say? Am I thinking correctly?
That is correct. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
As I was reflecting on some of this, I thought of my dad. And my dad, in his era, it wasn't natural, or maybe the upbringing, to focus a lot on complimenting your kids. And so I wouldn't say that I got a lot of compliments from my dad, but he was huge on giving me opportunities. And I love that. Even as a little boy, he gave me opportunities to make things, to do things, to go to work, and to have responsibility, and to do it well sometimes, and to not do it well, and to learn from those consequences. So I was so grateful in that I had so many opportunities to learn that, to ask questions, to see others do that, right? That learn from others. And so I love that I was given opportunities.
I feel like we've talked here about parenting and preparing youth for the launching process. I'd love to hear your perspective on what does it look like maybe during the launching process. Is there a pulling away that we as parents need to do? What does this proper interaction look like when maybe they are a young adult or freshly out of the house? Help us steward this area. Roger, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's a parent's responsibility to always love, always be there, but understand that the young person is going to children are going to outgrow their parents. I mean, I take that as not a denigration of our duties, but I think God has in mind for them something that I have not thought of, most likely. And so it's quite presumptuous on my part to assume that God is going to lead them in the same way that I've been led, and in not trying to make their lives mirror images of ours. In order to experience God the way I have experienced Him, they need freedom to be able to make choices.
I want to put my finger on perhaps the challenge of that, and then would love to hear both you and Craig respond to it. And what I am thinking and I'm wondering is, did you have to give up some hard things to do that? And when I say give up some hard things, I mean, did you have to endure some losses? Did you have to say, I expected this and I got that, and I've worked it through and processed that? So my direct question is, have you been disappointed, and had you had to work through that disappointment?
I think the things as parents that we give up are not anything worth keeping. I think there's pride involved in a lot of parenting. I remember when my children were toddlers, and I thought that was the only time in my life that I thought I kind of knew what parenting was about. And then reality set in and they became older, and I realized that I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I knew. And so it's a loss of pride if they make choices that are contrary to the choice I would have made. If we expect to control that child, our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller because we don't want them to be influenced by somebody else. And in fact, we need them to be influenced by somebody else. There's a thing called dependency, and there's a healthy dependency and an unhealthy dependency, and we want them to be able to reach out for help rather than saying, I can do everything myself, I don't need anybody around.
I really love that, Roger. And I'm smiling right now because of the humility that you portrayed in that sentiment about the humility of parenting. Healthy and unhealthy dependency, I want to come back to that, Roger, but before, I don't want to lose the point with Craig. Craig, speak to this concept of parents giving up control and build on the humility that that requires, but also the loss that you might endure with your paradigms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I would even tweak and say it's more than just giving up control. It's replacing. What am I replacing my control with something else, right? And so, yes, I do give that up, but it doesn't go into this completely void neutral state. But it's a replacement piece. And you know what? Just as an imperfect person, you bet I have been hurt. I have been disappointed in things that my children have said and done. And it doesn't have to be when they're older, even in younger, and recognizing that's not how I taught you, or that's not what we've talked about. That's not what your mom, modeled to you. That's not how we are. And those things have happened as they've grown and adjusted and challenged to their walk and independence and maturing process. And yet there's been, in the hurt of that, in that giving up hurt, I then have to make a decision. What do I do with that? Do I get out the chisel and hammer and come back and say, well, obviously, I just need to hammer out or chisel out on you more or harder to get you to be more what I think I want you to be, versus that exchange piece, that replacement piece of acknowledging, wow, that's not where I would like to see things, but you know what? I can trust a bigger process. I can trust that God is directing them as well, and that God has them in a different season and state, and that it may not be exactly where I'm at, but I can replace that confidence in God's love for them. That, okay, maybe this is part of their journey. Maybe this is part of where they're at. And how do I come alongside of them instead of just getting out a bigger hammer and a bigger chisel to say, okay, I just need to do some more work on that.
And this is where I'm going to cut in on today's conversation. When we return, we're going to find out that there is a role the community plays in both launching and receiving our kids. We look forward to having you with us.